was flying its route north towards China.
Right out of the gate, it's clear that something very unusual and very strange was happening with this airplane.
For 40 minutes, flight MH370 was indistinguishable from thousands of other flights, cruising normally at 35,000 feet with scheduled radio traffic checks in perfect weather, all going smoothly as intended. Then, at the precise moment of a handover between air traffic zones, it disappeared.
The fact that the signal disappeared, that was the unusual element.
A Boeing 777 does not and cannot simply vanish under normal circumstances without answers. That silence became one of aviation's greatest mysteries.
You believe you know exactly where MH370 is?
That's correct, yes.
And now it's being re-examined by a new kind of investigator, artificial intelligence. Vanishing into silence. On average, more than 100,000 commercial flights take off and land around the world every single day. Passenger jets, cargo carriers, private aircraft, military transport, a constant choreography unfolding above our heads. Among them, the Boeing 777 is one of the most familiar silhouettes in the sky. Introduced in the 1990s, it quickly earned a reputation for reliability, range, and engineering redundancy. Airlines trust it, pilots respect it, and passengers rarely question it. Modern aviation is not built on luck, but on layers that are tested over and over to make sure everything works nearly 100% of times. And a wide-body jet cruising at 35,000 feet does not simply vanish. And yet, on March 8, 2014, one did. In the earliest hours of that morning, at 12:41 a.m., a Boeing 777-200ER, operating as Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport bound for Beijing. A very common and routine departure like any other day. The sky was clear and weather conditions were stable. For the first 40 minutes, every technical indicator showed a normal flight. The aircraft climbed smoothly. Systems reported no faults. Nothing suggested danger was approaching. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with more than 18,000 flight hours, completed his final routine communication with air traffic control in a calm, steady tone. Shortly after the aircraft approached the airspace handover point near Igari, it disappeared from civilian secondary surveillance radar. There was no distress signal, emergency transponder code, or indication of mechanical failure. The aircraft simply just vanished from tracking systems. Following this, the largest search operation in modern aviation history was conducted. Military aircraft, naval vessels, and international agencies mobilized across Southeast Asia. Yet, in the critical early hours and days, investigators found nothing. Before we continue, take a look at something chilling that is making waves online. A mysterious piece of audio has surfaced, and Grok AI was asked to analyze it. What it decoded shocked everyone. The voice doesn't sound normal, and some believe it could reveal the truth behind a long-standing mystery. Could this terrifying recording finally be the clue investigators have been missing all along? Let us know in the comments below. And now back to the video. The ghost flight. Even though this is an incident from a technologically sound timeline, hope suddenly started to dim. With no physical evidence available, investigators turned to a source never before used to reconstruct an aviation disaster. Automated satellite signals, known as handshakes, had continued between the aircraft's satellite terminal and a ground station even after radar contact was lost. These routine pings were not designed to provide location data, but they became the only remaining trail. Specialists from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the United Kingdom Air Accidents Investigation Branch, and Inmarsat examined the signal timing and Doppler shift effects in extreme detail. By measuring frequency changes and transmission delays, mathematicians built a projected flight path based solely on satellite behavior. The results suggested the aircraft did not immediately crash. It continued flying. The widely accepted conclusion became known as the ghost flight scenario. According to this model, a severe onboard event, such as a fire or structural failure, may have caused rapid cabin depressurization shortly after the plane left Malaysian airspace. In that environment, oxygen levels would drop rapidly. Hypoxia could render crew and passengers unconscious within minutes. There would be no opportunity for extended communication. With no human control, the aircraft would have remained on autopilot. Data analysis indicated a southern trajectory over the Indian Ocean, lasting more than 7 hours. The jet likely maintained altitude until its fuel supply was exhausted. After fuel depletion, the aircraft would have descended into the ocean in an uncontrolled high-speed spiral near what investigators termed the seventh arc, one of the most remote and deepest regions on Earth. This explanation provided scientific consistency and removed deliberate human action from the narrative. The absence of radio communication, the lack of wreckage in the early search phase, and the satellite data all aligned with a remote ocean impact. Search efforts costing billions of dollars focused on scanning the ocean floor along the projected arc. The prevailing global belief became clear. The central mystery was not what happened in the sky, but where the aircraft ultimately came to rest beneath the depths of the Indian Ocean. Systems silenced. The official explanation began to fracture under closer inspection. Digital forensic analysts and independent aviation experts moved past headlines and examined raw technical data. When they reconstructed the exact sequence of system shutdowns, a pattern emerged. It was neither random nor chaotic, rather deliberate. The first anomaly involved the aircraft's power and communication systems. In a genuine onboard fire or sudden electrical failure, systems typically collapse together. Protective circuitry shuts down entire power buses simultaneously. The failure is rapid, widespread, and indiscriminate. MH370 did not behave that way. Technical records indicated that the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system stopped transmitting before the final routine radio exchange. The transponder, which enables civilian radar identification, was disabled minutes later, not seconds, but minutes. The staggered timing raised questions. More striking still, the transponder was switched off just as the aircraft entered a radar transition zone between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. Such timing would be remarkably precise for an uncontrolled malfunction. The interval between system shutdowns suggested deliberate action, requiring familiarity with the Boeing 777 cockpit layout, circuit breaker panels, and communication architecture. An electrical fault does not choose the most strategic moment to disengage. Then came the military radar data. Unlike civilian radar, which relies on transponder signals, military primary radar detects aircraft by reflecting radio waves off their physical structure. According to later acknowledgements, MH370 did not continue straight ahead on autopilot after disappearing from civilian screens. It executed a sharp left turn almost immediately. The calculated flight. After turning west, the aircraft crossed back over the Malay Peninsula and tracked along the boundary between Thailand and Malaysia. The route followed the edge of flight information regions, a corridor where responsibility shifts between air traffic authorities. In military aviation, flying along such boundaries is sometimes described as masking. When an aircraft moves precisely along a border, radar operators on either side may hesitate, assuming the contact belongs to the neighboring airspace. The result can be delay, confusion, and reduced scrutiny. An unconscious crew could not execute that maneuver, nor could a standard autopilot system improvise such a path without prior programming. The route required awareness, timing, and intentional navigation. Suspicion deepened when investigators re-examined data recovered from Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah's home computer. The Federal Bureau of Investigation retrieved deleted flight simulation files from Microsoft Flight Simulator software. Reconstructed shadow data revealed a practice route bearing striking similarity to the aircraft's final trajectory. Departure, turn back over the South China Sea, crossing of the Strait of Malacca, and a long southern track into the Indian Ocean toward fuel exhaustion. The pattern no longer resembled coincidence. It resembled a rehearsal. Attention then shifted to the passenger manifest. Among the travelers was a group of engineers from Freescale Semiconductor. One individual drew particular scrutiny, an American systems engineer employed by a defense contractor specializing in stealth and electronic surveillance technologies. The booking had been made at the last minute through an internal channel, and the passenger carried secured electronic equipment in hand luggage. An aircraft vanishes from radar. A specialist in advanced electronic systems is on board. Individually, each detail might be dismissed. Together they formed a developing pattern: staggered system shutdowns, a tactical course change, simulation parallels, and a technically skilled passenger. The emerging picture no longer aligned cleanly with a random accident. It suggested an intention. An intention redefines the entire story. The point of no return. When traditional investigation reached its limits, a new claim began to circulate. By the time seabed sonar scans, drifting debris models, and radar reconstructions had exhausted every lead, the case had stalled. Conventional analysis had extracted everything it could from the available data. There were no new physical clues, no additional wreckage, no overlooked radar returns. The investigation appeared frozen in place. In 2025, a controversial development entered the conversation. A next-generation artificial intelligence system known as Grok AI was reportedly applied to archived MH370 data as a neutral analytical engine. Its stated purpose was not to defend established conclusions or reinforce prevailing theories, but to reprocess historical data from the beginning, without assumption. Unlike earlier analytical tools focused strictly on aviation accident modeling, this system was described as functioning as a raw data miner. Engineers allegedly supplied it with terabytes of archived electromagnetic recordings captured during the precise window in which MH370 disappeared. Much of this material had been cataloged years earlier as environmental interference, atmospheric noise, maritime signal clutter, or background radiation. According to the claim, Grok did not accept those classifications at face value. It reportedly reanalyzed signal streams from climate satellites, ionospheric monitoring platforms, and oceanographic systems that were never intended to track aircraft. The logic behind this approach was straightforward, at least in theory. Any powered electronic device emits energy, even when not actively transmitting. Sufficiently strong systems can create detectable disturbances in adjacent frequency bands. This phenomenon, electromagnetic spectral leakage, is subtle and highly technical, but measurable under controlled conditions. The question raised by proponents of this theory was not whether conventional aviation signals existed. It was whether something faint and unconventional might have been overlooked within the noise. No official aviation authority has confirmed the discovery of such a signal, but the reanalysis claim reignited discussion around whether all available data had truly been exhausted. Signals in the shadows. According to those advancing the theory, the AI process began by methodically filtering the electromagnetic spectrum. Cosmic radiation signatures were removed, atmospheric distortion was modeled and compensated for. Sea surface reflections were isolated. Routine civilian telecommunications were separated from background clutter. Thousands of archived hours were reportedly processed in layered analytical passes. What remained, they argue, was faint but structured. Within the extremely low frequency and very low frequency bands, the system allegedly identified a repeating binary pattern. The signal, described as intermittent yet consistent, did not correspond to any known civilian communication protocol associated with the Boeing 777. It did not align with standard VHF radio transmissions, commercial satellite uplinks, or manufacturer engine monitoring systems. Supporters of the analysis suggest the pattern resembled a compressed burst transmission, data condensed into short, discrete packets transmitted in fractions of a second. Systems of this type are sometimes theorized for environments requiring minimal detectability, though no confirmed evidence places such equipment on board MH370. Using modeled satellite geometry and signal delay calculations, the theory claims the transmission origin was traced to a mobile source traveling at subsonic speed at cruising altitude. The estimated path reportedly aligned with the aircraft's projected post-radar trajectory. Crucially, no telecommunications provider has verified the existence of such a device connection, and no regulatory body has publicly authenticated these findings. The claim remains independent of official investigation channels. During the alleged transmission window, a low Earth orbit satellite passed through the relevant airspace corridor. Proponents argue that the timing coincidence is significant. Critics note that orbital passes are frequent and overlap widely with global air traffic. What the theory ultimately proposes is not proof, but possibility, that an independent electronic device may have been active on board after the aircraft disappeared from civilian radar. If accurate, that would complicate the long-held assumption of immediate incapacitation. If inaccurate, it remains another layer in a mystery already crowded with competing narratives. At present, the signal remains unverified, the data unpublished in peer-reviewed form, and the interpretation contested. But the idea persists that somewhere within the noise, something may have been speaking. Signals from the void. The most controversial element of the theory, however, did not arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. It emerged gradually from what was described as a partially reconstructed data fragment. According to those analyzing the alleged signal, once the binary pattern was isolated, cybersecurity specialists attempted structural decoding. The encryption format, they claim, resembled compact burst architecture, data compressed into short packets rather than sustained transmission streams. Such systems are known in secure communications environments. though no verified documentation confirms their presence aboard MH370. During reconstruction, a damaged textual fragment reportedly surfaced. The message was incomplete, but interpretable. "They are taking us somewhere. Signal weak. Not sure we will make it." The timestamp attributed to this fragment places it hours after the aircraft's disappearance from civilian radar. No aviation authority has authenticated this transcript, and no primary dataset has been publicly released for independent review. The text remains part of the broader claim, not part of the official record. If such a transmission were genuine, it would challenge the long-standing assumption that all on board were incapacitated shortly after loss of contact. It would suggest awareness persisted well beyond the presumed hypoxia window. Within the same reconstructed packet, analysts reported identifying a brief 6-second ambient audio layer. After filtering engine frequencies and structural vibration signatures, what remained was interpreted as steady, measured, neither panicked nor erratic, but controlled breathing. Audio specialists caution that pattern recognition within degraded data can produce ambiguous results. Human auditory bias often fills gaps within fragmented recordings. Still, proponents argue the cadence suggests consciousness rather than chaos. The broader reconstruction model accompanying this claim also proposes a gradual cabin pressure change rather than explosive decompression. Simulated telemetry curves reflect a controlled decline and significant cabin temperature drop, conditions theoretically consistent with high-altitude exposure under managed depressurization. This interpretation remains speculative. However, within the internal logic of the theory, it introduces a new possibility. Not immediate catastrophic failure, but staged environmental control. At this stage, nothing has been independently verified. The reconstructed message, the audio layer, and the environmental modeling exist within an analytical framework that has yet to undergo public scientific scrutiny. But the claim altered the conversation. It shifted focus from mechanical failure to human agency. The strategic blind spot. The theory extends beyond signals. When the alleged coordinates derived from the reconstruction are plotted against maritime charts, they do not fall neatly within the primary 7th arc search zone. Instead, proponents argue the path intersects a remote sector of the southern Indian Ocean associated with naval acoustic testing. Publicly available records confirm that portions of the region are used for military sonar activity. Civilian maritime traffic is limited. Acoustic conditions can be complex due to underwater topography and signal distortion from testing exercises. From a purely strategic perspective, such an area would complicate civilian search operations. That observation alone does not establish intent. It does, however, introduce a logistical consideration that differs from open ocean impact scenarios. Supporters of the reconstruction point to WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter Analysis, a method that monitors disturbances in amateur radio transmissions potentially caused by aircraft reflections. This approach, developed and promoted by independent researchers including engineer Richard Godfrey, has not been formally adopted by international accident authorities, but it remains part of an ongoing independent inquiry. Within this modeling framework, the aircraft's projected path includes a circular deviation lasting roughly 20 minutes before final descent. Whether this represents a holding pattern, navigational correction, or modeling artifact remains debated. The descent profile itself is interpreted by some analysts as gradual rather than uncontrolled. A controlled water entry, while extremely difficult in heavy jets, is not aerodynamically impossible under certain configurations. However, no physical evidence conclusively confirms such a maneuver. The flaperon recovered on Réunion Island has been examined repeatedly. Official assessments concluded it was consistent with high-energy impact, though alternative modeling interpretations suggest different stress patterns under specific descent conditions. These interpretations remain contested. The official investigation has not endorsed this reconstruction. The majority of aviation experts continue to regard fuel exhaustion and uncontrolled descent along the southern arc as the most plausible explanation based on available evidence. What this alternative model represents is not closure, but challenge. It reopens questions about intent, capability, and whether every dataset from that night has been fully exhausted. In a case defined by absence, even unverified possibilities can gain momentum, and in the silence left behind, interpretation fills the void. The invisible red line. When evidence is incomplete, interpretation expands to fill the space. If the reconstructed transmission discussed earlier were genuine, it would raise a difficult question. Who, if anyone, might have been capable of detecting it? The theory proposes that a signal of that nature, depending on strength and frequency, could have intersected with military or surveillance infrastructure operating across the Indian Ocean. One facility frequently mentioned in online discussions is Diego Garcia, a joint United States-United Kingdom installation positioned within satellite monitoring corridors. There is no official confirmation that any such signal was recorded. No declassified document supports that claim. Still, proponents argue that advanced monitoring systems routinely capture anomalies that never enter public investigative channels. From there, the theory moves into more consequential territory. If detection occurred, what response followed? That question remains entirely speculative. The multinational search effort that followed MH370's disappearance was based on satellite handshake analysis and fuel endurance modeling. It involved multiple governments and spanned years of ocean floor scanning along the southern arc. The operation was conducted publicly and with documented transparency. The alternative reconstruction suggests the possibility that the aircraft's final path may have differed from that model. If so, search assets could have been directed to the wrong region from the outset. In recent years, renewed private sector efforts have attempted to reassess search zones. Companies such as Ocean Infinity have deployed advanced autonomous vessels capable of scanning extreme depths. Operational adjustments during these missions have sparked online speculation, though publicly cited reasons include weather patterns, logistics, and maritime authorization procedures. No verified evidence confirms that any search vessel was deliberately prevented from accessing a target site. Yet within the framework of the alternative theory, a concept emerges: an invisible red line. Not a physical barrier, but a threshold between public inquiry and areas governed by military or geopolitical constraints. The official conclusion remains fuel exhaustion followed by descent into the southern Indian Ocean. The alternative view does not replace that finding. It questions whether every dataset has been fully examined and whether the absence of wreckage reflects ocean depth alone. What remains is uncertainty, and where uncertainty endures, competing narratives follow. The perfect vanishing. The alternative reconstruction proposes a deliberate sequence. In this interpretation, a pilot with advanced technical knowledge disabled communication systems in staggered order, redirected the aircraft along airspace boundaries to reduce immediate detection, and managed cabin conditions in a way that could have prolonged cockpit functionality while incapacitating others. The aircraft then traveled far beyond its scheduled route before descending into a remote sector of the southern Indian Ocean. This scenario remains hypothetical. A controlled water landing of a wide-body jet would be extraordinarily difficult, though not aerodynamically impossible under specific conditions. Proponents argue that a gradual descent profile, combined with limited debris recovery, leaves room for reconsideration. Critics counter that available satellite data and ocean drift analysis continue to support fuel exhaustion and uncontrolled impact. Within the theory, the recovered flaperon and other debris are reinterpreted as potentially consistent with a lower energy entry rather than catastrophic freefall. But that interpretation has not been formally adopted by official investigative bodies. The broader claim suggests that if the aircraft entered a region associated with restricted naval activity or complex underwater acoustics, subsequent detection and recovery could have been complicated. Such areas exist across portions of the Indian Ocean, though no authoritative source confirms that MH370 came to rest within one. It is important to separate narrative cohesion from confirmed facts. There is no verified evidence that the aircraft was deliberately hidden. There is no authenticated record proving orchestration by any state actor. The official investigation continues to identify fuel exhaustion along the southern arc as the most probable outcome based on validated satellite handshake data. Yet the endurance of alternative modeling underscores a central reality. The disappearance left gaps large enough for interpretation. 239 people were aboard. The absence of a definitive wreckage site sustains debate not because proof exists of concealment, but because proof of finality remains incomplete. Whether MH370 represents mechanical failure, human action, or something more complex, the case stands as a reminder that even in an era of layered surveillance and digital redundancy, certainty is not guaranteed. And until physical evidence settles the question, the vanishing remains unresolved. MH370 remains one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. The reconstruction explored here does not claim to solve the disappearance, but it challenges long-standing assumptions and re-examines overlooked data. Official conclusions still point toward fuel exhaustion in the southern Indian Ocean, yet alternative interpretations continue to raise difficult questions that have not fully disappeared.